Mr. Levine, does the state wish to give an opening statement?
Yes, thank you.
You may proceed.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It was a Sunday evening, September 8th of last year, in Auburndale, Florida. And it was at that time that the defendant viciously and savagely unleashed his full fury and hatred towards his mother upon her, when he stabbed her with such force that the knife went shooting through her neck muscles, through her esophagus, through her trachea, through her thyroid cartilage, and shot out the other side of her neck. You will hear and see that as this happened, she began to bleed, and bleed profusely, through the huge gash in her neck. While she bled, the defendant was there and watched as the blood came out of the huge hole in her neck. You're going to hear that he was there as he watched the blood and the life drain from her body until she took her final breath and was officially dead. You're also going to hear that this was exactly what the defendant meant to do, and that this is exactly what the defendant had thought about doing and had wanted to do for quite some time. So much so that he told multiple people, including multiple Charlotte County Sheriff's Office deputies and his own grandfather, the father of the defendant's mother, Collin Griffith. His name's Robert Willantis. You're going to hear from him. He'll fly in from New Mexico, and he'll tell you about those haunting statements that the defendant made. And you're going to see that exactly what the defendant said he wanted to do and said that he would do, he accomplished on the night of September 8th of last year. But how did Collin Griffith get there, bleeding out on her mother's kitchen floor? In order to understand that, we're going to have to take a step back and take a walk through some time. So you're going to see, of course, not just what happened on and around September 7th and September 8th, some of the critical time leading up to the murder, but you're also going to see and hear how this all began. Now, we're going to take a trip back to February 14th of 2023, the year prior to the defendant killing his mom. At that time, the defendant lived in Oklahoma. And you're going to hear on February 14th of 2023, the defendant killed somebody else when he shot that person 2 times. He shot that person in the chest, and he shot that person in the head. You're going to hear that it was undisputed that he shot that person, that he was arrested for that killing, and that he has not been charged to this date. Now, after that killing, ladies and gentlemen, the defendant, as a little bit of time progressed, he moved back to Florida. He had been living with his dad for a number of years in Oklahoma, approximately 3 years or so. While he was living in Oklahoma with his dad, his mom lived in Florida, in some different places, but including Port Charlotte most recently. And you're going to hear that while the defendant lived with his dad, the mom, as any mom would, greatly missed her son. And she didn't get an opportunity for different reasons, including a very controlling dad that the defendant was living with. So Collin Griffith basically didn't have much contact with her son, not because she didn't want to, but she would try to call him and talk to him, and it pained her greatly that her son was not with her. You're going to hear that there's another brother, an older brother. He really doesn't have much to do with this case, but nonetheless, there was an older brother who lived with his mom, Kathy, for a period of time before he moved out of the house when he was old enough. So, as the defendant moves to Florida, his mom wanted to make up for lost time. That was 3 years, 3 critical years of her life and his life when they didn't do mother-son things. They didn't spend time together. They didn't have all those opportunities that maybe other kids and other parents had. So Kathy, the defendant's mom, tried to make up for lost time. And she took her son on multiple vacations. They took cruises. They went to Disney World. They traveled out of the country. They went to Washington, D.C. And she spent all her time and affection and money on the defendant. That was her son. And that's who she had missed for all those years. Now, was Kathy Griffith the perfect parent? No. Was she the perfect person? No. But nobody is. But you're going to hear that she gave everything that she had, including her life, to try to take care of the defendant and spend as much time as she could with him, even at the cost of her life, which ultimately is what happened. Now, as the defendant and his mom lived in Charlotte County, in Port Charlotte, they lived in a house, a well-kept house. It was the two of them. And they did plenty of things together. Like I said, they went on vacations. They went to the movies. They hung out. It was just the two of them. So they had nothing but basically one-on-one time. And you're going to hear that Kathy Griffith, like any mom, expected certain things. These weren't off-the-wall, dictator-like things. These were simple things that she thought would be appropriate to teach her son about responsibility and respect. Chores, minimal chores, such as weed whack in the backyard, taking trash and food or candy out of his room, helping her around the house with whatever little odd jobs might happen. But you're going to see in here, the defendant wanted nothing of that. He didn't want to be inconvenienced. He didn't respect his mom. He didn't care about his mom. And wherever this deep-seated anger and hatred came from, it was real within him, and he told people about it. So as the days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, his anger, as you'll see, was building and building.
Judge, I'm going to object to this being argumentative.
As the time went on, you'll see that the mom had to deal with a lot of issues, including being attacked by her own son. You'll hear a little bit about the defendant being arrested at a certain point for domestic violence battery. He was a juvenile, as he still is a juvenile. And you'll hear that he was put on some probation. But in essence, he was not happy with his mom. So he took her down on the ground and stomped on her hand. But they continued to live together. The mom, you'll hear, was afraid of the defendant and what ultimately might happen to her. And she was afraid he would kill her. But she loved him. And you're going to hear that she wanted to be with him. And she was cognizant of the fact that when he turned 18, he was probably going to leave the house. And that would, for all intents and purposes, end that one-on-one time. And he would continue on with his life however he saw fit. So it wasn't like every day was chaos or bedlam in the house. But the defendant had issues. The mom had some issues. But they were working through them. Now, sometimes they would go to the movies together. Sometimes there would be good days. And you're going to actually get to see kind of like an inside peek of some time on September 7th and September 8th, the day that the defendant killed his mom. You're going to see that in the form of Ring camera footage that Kathy had set up inside because she was so afraid of what her son might do to her. And you're going to see that there was cameras set up in different parts that basically captured the same or similar things. But you're going to get to see some footage from a kitchen camera that captures the kitchen as well as into the living room. So you're not going to have to sit through 48 hours or 72 hours of just nothing happening. But you're going to see some clips so you can kind of tell what the vibe was on those last 2 days of Kathy's life. You're also going to get to be able to see the timeline as it continues. We talked a little bit about jury selection, about a timeline, because nothing happens in a vacuum. So as the defendant's living with his mom, he starts making these statements that he wants to kill his mom, and that if he has to go back to his mom, he's going to kill her or do her harm or do himself harm. And he tries to make accusations against his mom that you'll see she was never arrested for anything as it pertains to the defendant. But nonetheless, he starts telling detectives, he starts telling deputies. And so the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office has different units, as does a lot of law enforcement agencies. And you'll hear that they took a proactive approach because they didn't want to see anything bad happen to the defendant, and they didn't want to see anything bad happen to the mom. So you'll hear that there were multiple deputies and detectives that would check in on the family, would check in on mom, would check in on the defendant. And their goal was to try to ensure that both parties got along and that, of course, they lived long, happy lives together. It didn't work out that way, not from a lack of their trying. So as the year continues, the defendant, as I mentioned, got arrested for the domestic violence battery. He got Baker acted a time or two. And when he would be about to be released, he would make statements. Basically, he would say he didn't want to go with his mom. If he went with his mom, he was afraid of what might happen, of his anger, that he would kill his mom. He also made statements that he was afraid that she would do something to him. But the reoccurring theme that you will hear from the witnesses from the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office is that the defendant verbalized what he ultimately did, which is that he would kill his mom. You'll hear from one or more deputies that even asked him, well, how are you going to do that? And he specifically mentioned, sometimes he would mention different things, like shoot or stab, but a reoccurring theme was he would mention that he would stab his mom. So the intervention continued with the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. They would talk to both Kathy on the phone, the defendant on the phone. They were accessible. They would call and check in. They would stop by the house and talk. And the defendant and his mom independently, they had the ability to call the deputies and the detectives as well. Now, 2024, around February 19th or so, around that time, or perhaps a little bit earlier, the defendant sent a text message. He had many communications with an attorney that was
I'm going to object based on we don't know if this is going to be admissible.
You may continue, Mr. Levine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, continuing on to some of the statements that the defendant made that explicitly forecasted what he did on September 8th of 2024. I mentioned the name Robert Willantis. Robert Willantis, as you'll hear, was Kathy Griffith's father. He is the maternal grandfather of the defendant. You're going to hear that Robert Willantis, of course, had a relationship with his grandson, loved his grandson, cared about his grandson, and still does. And the defendant told him something that was super, super disturbing, to say the least. You will hear from Robert Willantis that the defendant said to him that he wanted to kill his mom and how he was going to do it. And the defendant said, more than anything else, I want to slit her throat and feel her bleed out and feel the life leave her body. That's how much I hate her. You're going to hear that Mr. Willantis, needless to say, was absolutely shocked. And he told his grandson, that's sick, that's twisted, you can't do that. You know, you and your mom have issues, and you're going to need to work through those issues. September 7th of last year. The morning started with Kathy buying her son, or letting him use her credit card, to buy Starbucks. Bought a couple drinks, a breakfast sandwich, and the defendant came home. And this is going to be some of the ring footage that you see. So you'll be able to see some of these interactions. And you're going to see the mom and the son and some about how they're talking to each other and kind of what happened that day. The mom had minimal requests of the defendant. On that specific day, she wanted her son to help her put up a bookshelf. The defendant didn't want to be bothered. The mom wanted her son to weed whack the backyard. The defendant didn't want to be bothered. The mom wanted her son to clean up the food and the candy that was in his room, attracting ants, but the son didn't want to be bothered. You'll see that he had his Starbucks, he had his sandwich, he wanted to do what he wanted to do, which was he wanted to take a walk, get out of the house and exercise. So the end of the day, or sometime during the day, the end result is that the mom got fed up with him. Kathy was sick and tired of being disrespected, sick and tired of doing everything for her son, and basically told him, get out until you can show me some respect. Well, the defendant had no problem with that, because he just wanted to do what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it, so he went to his grandma's house. So that's how the defendant and his mom in Charlotte County, how their lives come to Polk County. Because the defendant's grandmother, who is Kathy's mom, her name is Susan Detman. Her and Robert Willantis used to be married back in the day. She had multiple houses, one in the Keys, one in Auburndale, and perhaps one somewhere else too. So the defendant got in his car. It was a nice Volkswagen, black four-door. You'll hear and see that the mom had a white four-door Volkswagen. And the defendant drove to his grandma's house in Auburndale. And you'll see and hear at his grandma's house, he didn't have to put up with his mom asking him to do things, or to be respectful, or to do chores. You'll also hear that during the relationship between Kathy and her son, she got him video games. She got him a phone. She let him use her credit card to fill up, and use his bank card to fill up gas. She provided food. Of course, she provided shelter, clothes. I mean, the basic necessities, but she did more than that. The defendant, you're going to hear and see, is a very smart individual. He was in high school and was, I believe, taking college courses and had an interest in the law. And you're going to see that he was a fairly smart individual, and he would use that knowledge to try to do certain things. So on September 7th, the defendant leaves. The mom is at home, and the mom's angry. She's not happy. Does she want to hurt Collin or kill him or do anything to him? No. She's mad because she knows that her time with her son is slipping away. He's 17 years old by now. Incidentally, he was almost 16 when he killed the individual in Oklahoma. Now he's 17 years old on September 7th and September 8th. So mom is not happy because he's disrespecting her. He's not doing the chores. She's busting her rear end doing everything for this kid who's ungrateful. And she's mad. But nonetheless, she wants him home. She doesn't want him with her mom. She doesn't want him out running the streets or not knowing where he is. So she continually texts him and calls him. Her only desire is to get him home. Not to be mad at him or hurt him or ground him. She's willing basically to bend over backwards, as you'll see from the evidence, to just be with him. That's what she wants, is just time with him. You're going to get to see through text messages between her and him, her state of mind and what was going on. And the defendant was basically just blowing her off. He didn't want to be aggravated. But you're going to see kind of the mom was frantic, and once again frantic in terms of being a mom and wanting to know where her son was and wanted her son back in her house. So she started to give him ultimatums, things that she wasn't going to follow through on, some of the things. She was hoping not to have to follow through on any of these things. But you're going to see that she was saying, if you don't come home, I'm going to sell your car. If you don't come home, I'm going to cancel your insurance. I'm going to turn off your phone. And she would turn off the phone that she provided for him multiple times. She would turn off his phone. She would take away his computer. All things that she bought. She bought him a computer for his school. She bought him a phone because, of course, that's what parents do. And you'll see when you're a child, you can't get a cell phone with AT&T or have an account with AT&T if you're not 18 or older. So he was relying upon his mom, and happy to do so, because she made sure that he had everything that he wanted. So she was saying these things because basically she was hoping that he would be afraid of them and would come home, but he could care less, as you'll see. But then the Oklahoma killing resurfaces. And you're going to see that besides just pure anger and hatred towards his mom, that his motive, an additional motive for killing her, was what she texted him. Because he was concerned that that Oklahoma killing was going to come back around. Of course, it was still under investigation and still is, but that was going to be reopened. And you're going to see firsthand why the defendant didn't want that to happen. And why that just infuriated him even more towards a mom that he hated and couldn't stand for no good reason. You're going to see firsthand that Kathy texted her son between 12 and 12:29, and he received it. And she texted him, Collin, the recordings of you admitting to killing, and then she stated who it was, and planning the murder, there are 4 different instances from my Ring camera, are all going to Bob, Susie, Amanda, and Chris at 3 p.m. today. And mind you, this is the day that he murders her, shortly thereafter. She continues on. Plus, the recovered audio from Chuck's iCloud. Chuck is the defendant's father. Kathy is ex-husband. So Kathy continues on. Plus, the recovered audio from Chuck's iCloud, where you told your dad you hated me and I was an evil bitch, are being sent too. My dad is sending me his recordings of you telling him how you planned my murder back in February. Audio, video, emails, texts, and phone records are all being sent. For the record, no, you cannot have a single one. Your attorney can request them. She continues on. All because you didn't want to help me mount a bookshelf. That took under 30 minutes. Weed eat the backyard and clean your room because bugs were in the candy you had all over. Remember, you chose this. You have 10 minutes to call me and fix this, Collin. When the defendant read that text, his anger level just rose even more. Later that same afternoon, Kathy pressed it even more. And she sent a text to her mom, Susan Detman. And mind you, the location where the defendant had run to was Susan's house, his grandma's house. She was down in the Keys at one of her houses, so Collin had free range of the place. Hey, no rules, nothing to do. He could do whatever he wants to do. Nobody's even there to supervise him. And that's why he would like to go places where there were no supervision. I mean, specifically his grandma's. So Susan was in contact with the defendant because she was driving up from the Keys, and the defendant was staying at the house there. So Kathy texted Susan a similar text message. And she texted her mom, Collin's grandmother, tell Collin the recordings of him admitting to killing, and then she stated who the person was, In planning the murder, there are 4 different instances from my Ring camera, are all going to Bob, Susie, Amanda, and Chris at 3 p.m. today. Plus, the recovered audio from Chuck's iCloud, where Collin told his dad he hated me and I was an evil bitch, are being sent too. Dad is sending me his recordings of Collin telling him how he planned my murder back in February. Audio, video, emails, texts, and phone records are all being sent. For the record, no, you cannot have a single one. Your attorney can request them, so can Collin's. You're going to see that afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, in an eerie video, Kathy changes her clothes. I mean, you're not going to see her change her clothes, but you're going to see she appears in the exact clothes that her son would kill her in, just mere hours later. And you're going to see that she had on some blue jean shorts. She had on a black t-shirt with a coffee motif. And she had a nice leather purse/backpack over her shoulder. And she left the house. And she was not happy. She was not happy at her mom. She was not happy at Collin. But she had one thing that she wanted to accomplish, which was not to do her son any harm, but to get him home so they could continue being mother and son. So she made the drive from Port Charlotte to Polk County. And you're going to hear that at a certain point, she arrived. Sometime in the ballpark of 5 o'clock, shortly before the defendant would murder her. Now, there were 2 ladies across the street in separate houses. But you have the grandmother's house on one side of the street, and then basically the 2 neighbors that lived across the street from the grandma, two nice ladies you'll hear from. But they both kind of independently saw and heard things. And you're going to hear that at around 5 o'clock, and one of the witnesses, I believe it was Miss Sally Bell, she remembers the time frame because she was about to leave for church. And she and her husband, you'll hear that they always like to leave right around 5 o'clock or touch before 5 in order to get to church and to talk to people and get a seat. So around 5 o'clock, these 2 ladies, Sally Bell and Nancy Jones, independently, they're just at their houses. They see Kathy and they see the defendant, and they're having an obvious argument. They also see that Kathy is not doing anything violent to the defendant, but she's animated, and the defendant is animated. And then they saw the defendant grab his mom by the hair and start dragging her from the driveway carport into the house. And as that happens, Kathy is telling her son, Collin, stop, let go, let go. Let go of me, you're hurting me. And that's the last that those 2 neighbors saw of Kathy Griffith. That's the last anyone would see of Kathy Griffith alive. You're going to have an opportunity to see crime scene footage and crime scene video, and you're going to see that the violence continued and started on that day when the defendant grabbed his mom by the hair and dragged her into the house as she was saying, let me go, Collin, you're hurting me. You're going to hear and see that this mom was doing nothing violent or physical to her son, who she took care of and loved. But the defendant thought it was all right to grab his mom by the hair and yank her into the house. Well, what happened on the way to the house? Kathy, one of her AirPods falls out. It falls in the mulch. The defendant drags her into the house, infuriated. Another earpod falls out of her other ear. You're going to see photos that Kathy would wear AirPods a lot to talk on the phone, listen to music. You're going to hear as he dragged her and was furious. You're going to see her AirPod case falls in the living room as he continues to drag her to the back of the house, letting his anger and rage come out. You're going to see the crime scene of that brutal, vicious, savage killing that I mentioned at the beginning of the opening statement. You're going to see pictures of Kathy who came out of her flip-flops as the defendant was attacking her. You're going to see photographs of a charger that is strewn about on the floor from when the defendant was attacking her. You're going to see that same brown leather backpack/purse that was over her shoulder when the defendant was attacking her came crashing to the ground. And you're going to see that it's got blood all over the place. That when he stabbed her, she was still holding it. There's blood on the outside. There's blood on the inside. There's blood on the front, on the back, on the wallet. And you will see firsthand the carnage that Kathy suffered as she laid in the pool of blood that came out of that deep gash in her neck, compliments of her son, Collin Griffith. When all the evidence is in, ladies and gentlemen, you should come to one conclusion. That being that the just verdict is holding the defendant responsible to what he chose to do on September 8th of 2024. And that just verdict, based upon the evidence that you will see and hear, is that you find the defendant guilty of both first-degree murder and kidnapping for the crimes that he perpetrated on his own mother. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. Does the defense wish to give an opening statement? You may proceed, Ms. Thornhill.
Good morning. You're probably expecting me to say something very different from what Mr. Levine presented, and you'd be right. I'm going to start by introducing some of the people that are a part of this family and whom you will hear from. You've heard some of their names already, but I think it's helpful if you know the relationships among them. So first we have Collin Griffith. Obviously you are aware of him. He's 17 years old. Catherine, or Kathy as she's known, Kathy Griffith, is Collin's mom. And tragically and sadly, she is no longer with us. Susan Detman is the third main person who is involved in this saga. Susan Detman is Kathy's mom and Collin's grandmother. Christopher Griffith is Collin's older brother, so son of Kathy and of Charles Griffith, who goes by Chuck sometimes. He was born when Kathy was very, very young. She got pregnant when she was 13. She gave birth at 14. Collin came along a few years later. You've already heard about Robert Willantis. He is Kathy's father and Collin's grandfather. You heard that he lives in New Mexico, and he has for many years. He's sort of removed from the family a little bit. Some other names you may hear are Christy Rooney, who is Kathy's older sister, oldest child of Susan and Chuck. John Paul Willantis, who is the younger brother of Kathy, also the child of Susan and Robert Willantis. Susan is now Detman. Finally, there is Nikki Markovich, who is now Susan's husband, and Kevin Markovich, who is the son of Susan and Nikki, so the half-brother of Kathy and the half-uncle to Collin. Okay? I should have drawn a family tree, but at any rate, this family, like a lot of families, at times is very close and at times has its issues. You'll hear about these cruises that multiple family members took together, but you'll also hear about estrangements and fights. The common denominator in the estrangements and fights, Kathy Griffith. She is the person who is periodically, or for really long periods of time, estranged from any number of those people that I have mentioned. You heard that she lived separate from Collin for many years. That was after her divorce from Charles Griffith. With Susan, the other main player, who you'll hear from, it depended not on the year or the month, depended on the day and sometimes even the minute, whether Kathy was communicating with Susan or whether she was telling Susan she never wanted to hear from her again and that she was dead to Susan, or that Susan was dead to her. Susan was a regular part of Kathy's life because she lived in Florida and close in Florida. Susan periodically stayed in Charlotte County. You heard about some of her other homes. She travels quite a bit, some for work, but for a variety of reasons. But she is the constant in Kathy's life. Always there when Kathy needs something, especially money. Some of the things you heard about that Kathy provided for Collin, according to Mr. Levine, were actually provided by Susan. Susan paid for every single trip they took, and that Kathy chose to take. Susan would pay Kathy's phone bill sometimes. At any rate, Susan was the constant. She will tell you about Kathy's personality. She'll tell you about her mental health problems. She'll tell you about Kathy's drinking and misuse of pills. She will tell you about Kathy's threats to commit suicide over the years, but not just threats. She will also tell you about the several attempts Kathy made on her own life. Beyond that, you're going to hear that Kathy not only wanted to cause harm to her own self, but Kathy has threatened or done harm to other people. You'll hear some of those details about some of the things that she actually did to another person in front of Collin, involving weapons. You will hear that she has threatened to kill different people at different times and actually taken steps towards completing that wish. You also hear that Kathy is not exactly reliable in what she says. You'll hear this from her own mother, that she makes things up, that she is unpredictable, she is erratic, and goes into rages. As I said before, Kathy has been, or was still, estranged from multiple family members at the time of her death. I won't go into the details now, but you will hear about some of those details as well. So let's go back to September of 2023, now that I've sort of laid the scene. The family went on a cruise in September of 2023. Susan paid for it. It was Susan and Kathy and Collin and Kevin, and I'm not sure if anybody else went or not. Kathy got upset on that cruise. You'll hear that Kathy, according to her own mother, if somebody doesn't do something that she expects them to do, she gets very angry. And in this particular situation, Kevin and his girlfriend was also on the cruise. Were supposed to meet her at 8 o'clock to go to some activity on the cruise. And apparently Kevin and his girlfriend were late, and Kathy got really upset and started saying that they lied to her and that she was done with them, and she ended up getting her own room for the last night or two of the cruise to be separated from everybody else. You'll hear that as Kathy and Collin were driving home from the cruise, and Kathy's already mad, at least according to Susan, that Kathy was also upset with Collin. You'll hear a variety of things about why she was upset with Collin. You'll hear that she claimed that he was failing a class, and that's why she was mad at him. He wasn't ever failing a class. Every single screenshot on the phone records that show his grades show A's and a B or two. Collin graduated early from high school with college credit. He was not failing. You may hear that Kathy was upset with Collin because he had an appointment set up with, he was dual enrolled too, so he had, high school teachers, but also college professors. She got upset that he said, "Oh, I have an appointment with one of my teachers or professors," and she was mad that she hadn't been told that in advance. There was a disagreement. So either on the way home or when they get home, you'll hear that Collin told this to police later, by the way, that my mom handed me an envelope and said, "Here are all the important papers you'll need if I'm gone." Then they are inside the house, and Kathy got her gun. The gun that she has owned and lied about whether she had it in her house or not at a variety of times, and pointed it at her son and said that she was going to either shoot him or herself or both. And then she handed the gun to Collin and said, "Just shoot me." She's ordering him around the house. At one point sends him outside and says, "When you hear the pop, you can come back in." Makes him sit down outside her bedroom, cross-legged, When he didn't want to sit cross-legged, she said, "You're going to sit cross-legged," with the gun pointed at him, while she sits on the bed. At some point, Kathy, I guess, decided not to go through with whatever her plan was, and in her erratic and unpredictable way, she put the gun away and drove Collin to school. So Collin goes straight to his teacher and says, "My mom just pulled a gun on me. She threatened to kill me. She threatened to kill herself. I'm scared." So the teacher immediately goes to the school resource officer, and they get the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office involved. Collin repeats to multiple people, his teacher, the SRO, the sheriff's officer, deputy that comes. And they did send someone to Kathy's house because they were doing this investigation, and Kathy won't open the door. She didn't want to speak to the officers. Eventually, they convinced her to speak with them. She said she'd had bad experiences with law enforcement in the past. She finally says, "That never happened. Collin's just making it up because he's upset that he was failing a class, and I took away his phone and his AirPods because he's failing a class." Okay, so divergent stories, right? Sheriff's deputies go back to Collin at the school and say, "Your mom says this never happened. She says you're just mad at her and made the whole thing up." And Collin is like, "No, it happened. This is what she did to me. She has a gun in the house." They didn't believe him. They believed Kathy. So, when he repeats, now to DCF staff members who are investigating, and he tells all of these details too, and the DCF worker has access to all of the prior DCF reports that exist from Florida that uniformly talk about Kathy being violent with others, Kathy not being protective of her children, Kathy threatening to or committing violence on other people. Despite all that, they believed Kathy. Collin repeated again and again, "I am scared to be with my mom. If she does something to me again, like pull a gun on me, if she attacks me, I will defend myself, and I may hurt her." So they put Collin in a Baker Act facility for those statements. Interestingly, Kathy, rather than being relieved that her son, who allegedly threatened to kill her, is in a safe place, does everything she can to not cooperate with the people in the Baker Act facility, the sheriff's deputies, DCF. They insist, because of what happened in Oklahoma, and because of what he said his mom had done to him, and because he said, "I don't feel safe going home because I'm afraid of what she might do to me again and what I will do in response," that he was safest in this facility. Kathy won't sign medical release forms so they can get more information about the family. She won't approve any medication for Collin. And then she hires a lawyer to get him released from the facility against all advice. When they were getting ready to release him to Kathy, he says, "Do not send me home with my mom. I am scared. She threatened me. If she comes at me, I'm going to defend myself." So they put him back in the Baker Act facility. By the way, they find out she does have a gun. Like, she owns the gun. Collin tells DCF, "I would rather go into foster care than go back with my mom." Because he didn't feel safe with her. Eventually, after you heard about the special unit from Charlotte County Sheriff's Office that got involved with the family, this is when they get involved. And you'll hear about either Corporal or Detective Rentis, he's a male, and Detective Lacey Zanoniani. A lot of times she's referred to as Lacey, or Detective Z. But they start getting involved with the family. They're making suggestions to Kathy about how to handle this situation, and she is fighting against them in any way she can. She eventually Kathy tells Detective Zanoniani that Collin is going to this place called Sandy Pines, and he's going to be there from between 60 and 90 days. They're going to work on a treatment plan for the trauma he has suffered, for the statements he's made. But after 3 days, Kathy checks him out of Sandy Pines against medical advice. There's a family meeting where Kathy admits to pulling a gun on Collin. But everybody in the family says, nope, Collin's going home with Mom, because Mom was insisting on it. It's her way or the highway. So that happened in September of 2023. Next you'll hear is about the November 2023 incident where Collin ended up getting arrested. What you'll hear is, once again, diverging stories about what happened. On November 12th of 2023, Collin called the sheriff's office. He may have even called Corporal Rentis. Okay, so he is reaching out. He is being forthcoming. He says, my mom and I had a verbal argument. I left the house because I'm scared. She told me that I should just pack my bags and go. Then you'll hear this happens over and over. It's a theme. She will kick him out, but then she'll claim he's a runaway and he must come back. Inconsistent. So he called Rentis and says, I don't feel safe at home because my mom still has her gun and because she's threatened me before and now we're fighting or arguing. That night, on November 12th, the deputies decide that it's best if Collin go with Susan, his grandmother. He's separate from his mom, which I think you'll hear from the sheriff's deputies is kind of what they think would be best for everyone, is to just not have Collin and his mom living together. But Kathy is insistent that he continue to live with her, despite her knowing what he has said. And remember, he has said, if she attacks me, I will defend myself. If she threatens me, I'm afraid of what might happen. So, Susan picks Collin up on November 12th. She brings him to Auburndale, which is she teaches, and her in-person teaching job is here in Polk County. So that is her main residence, is Polk County. But that's a 55 and older community. You're not supposed to have kids there for very long. You've got Kathy yelling, demanding that Susan bring her son back. You can't steal him from me, even though this is a resolution to the argument that Collin and Kathy had, and that Collin is saying he doesn't feel safe with his mom. At any rate, next day, Susan, who is a trooper, brings Collin back to his mom. Best decision? Probably not, but I don't think you can ever know what other people are going through when you're not going through it yourself. So she brings him back to Kathy, and they're all together in the home. And Susan will tell you quite honestly that she doesn't remember if it was this day or another day, because there were many days like this where she took Collin, and then Kathy insisted she bring him back, and then Kathy would go on a tirade against Collin when he came back. It may have happened this day, it may have happened another day, but Susan will tell you that Kathy punished Collin. Because even though sheriff's deputies had mediated this, Susan's going to take him for the night, let everybody cool down, that when Kathy started insisting that Collin come back to her, and he's 16, doesn't have a driver's license, doesn't have a car at this point, and he's with his grandmother. And apparently, grandmother, Susan, didn't bring him back quickly enough to Kathy's liking, but Kathy punishes Collin. Susan will tell you she saw Kathy make him do a whole bunch of push-ups and holding weights above his head, and then she whipped him with a belt in front of Susan. And Susan said, whoa, 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 that's going too far. And Kathy says, no, it's not, because Corporal Rentis said I can discipline him any way I want. Which isn't true, by the way. But so Susan, the walking on eggshells that she has done for years with Kathy, can't do much about it, she feels. Later that same day as they're eating, Kathy is, these are Susan's words, reading Collin the Riot Act about this is how it's going to be. This is what you're going to do. You have to listen to everything I say because Corporal Rentis says it's okay. Susan thought she was being way too harsh. And I realize parents differ in how they treat kids. That's fine. And Collin did stand up and say, let's just do this. Now, Collin told the police, because they did get involved, this is when he got arrested, that his mom kept telling him to shut up, and he wouldn't shut up. And you'll see some examples of that on the Ring video. Collin would talk back. Best decision? Obviously not. But he says that when he wouldn't shut up, his mom hit him in the face, punched him in the face. So he grabbed her and did a wrestling move where he basically flung her to the ground. He fully admits that. He says that while he was doing that, he kneed her in the stomach. Okay? He never denied doing that. At any rate, Susan says when he stood up and said, let's do this, she went to get her phone to call Rentis to try and mediate, and next thing she knew, they were both on the ground. She didn't see Kathy punch him, but she also said it's entirely possible it happened, based on her knowledge of her daughter and how she behaves. So, after she's on the ground, they're both on the ground, Collin gets up and leaves the house. Calls the police. That's how the police get involved. Collin calls them. And you'll see some of the body-worn camera footage from that night, with Collin talking to the officers, being very forthcoming. The officers spent a lot of time talking to all three people. Collin ends up getting arrested for domestic violence battery. Kathy denies she ever put her hands on him. He is put in jail that night. And the next morning, when he's getting ready to be released from the juvenile detention center, they say, okay, get in the car with your mom, because mom's there to pick him up. And Collin says, don't make me get in the car with her. If she attacks me, I'm afraid of what will happen. If she comes at me again, I'm going to defend myself. The law enforcement officer at the juvenile jail basically says, I don't like your attitude, get in the car with your mom. So Collin gets in the car with his mom, goes home, and she immediately starts making him do standing marches with weights above his head. And you'll see that on body-worn camera footage, because while the personnel at the jail forced Collin to get in the car with his mom, even though he said he didn't feel safe with her, they did call the sheriff's office and say, by the way, I had a kid that said he might kill his mom, which is not what happened. Well, I wasn't concerned enough about it to not let him get in the car with his mom, but I'm calling you, can you guys go check? So all these sheriff's deputies troop up to the house. Kathy opens the door, come in, and you see Collin doing this with weights above his head, and the officers separate them and speak with each one. Kathy's saying, he beat the shit out of me last night. This is his form of discipline. He's been doing it since he got home from the jail. Collin is outside talking to the detectives, once again, being very forthcoming. He says, my mom thinks I'm going to hurt her, that I want to hurt her. I don't want to hurt her, but if she comes at me, I'm going to defend myself. Guess what happened that day? Collin gets Baker Acted again. So, Collin's back in a psychiatric facility for the statements that he made about, I don't feel safe with my mom. If she comes at me, I'm afraid I'll do her harm. Meanwhile, Kathy is calling Corporal Rentis and Detective Zanoniani, all upset that Collin got taken away from her. And then she starts making suicidal statements to them. So they send other deputies to the house, and Kathy gets Baker Acted for threatening suicide. So, all is not well at home, clearly. After Collin was arrested for domestic violence battery, Susan, his grandmother, hired him a lawyer named Jeff Rapkin down in Charlotte County to represent him in those criminal charges. Kathy is back and forth about what she wants to happen. Sometimes she wants the charges dropped. Sometimes she wants Collin to get diversion. Sometimes she wants him to, get the books thrown at him. Jeff Rapkin realizes that this is not a good situation. So he crafted what's called a 751 agreement. And this is an agreement between Kathy and Susan that allows for concurrent custody of Collin. And you'll see the legal paperwork. It was signed and notarized by Kathy and Susan and Mr. Ratkin. It was filed with the courts. The court ordered this concurrent custody agreement, meaning that Collin could be with either Susan or Kathy. Each one of them could make medical decisions for him. Each one of them could enroll him in school, that they had equal authority over Collin. And the idea was to kind of give everybody a break and respite. Kathy sometimes misinterprets that concurrent custody agreement. You'll see in some of her text messages or hear her on Ring video leaving messages for other people or talking to them. The agreement says that you can only have him if I'm mentally incapable of taking care of him or if I'm physically incapacitated, which is not true. You'll see the paperwork. At any rate, she has this very ambivalent, is a very tame term, very ambivalent feelings about whether Collin should be with her or not with her. And over the next few months, so December 2023 into the first few months of 2024, there is a lot of back and forth, meaning Collin goes between Susan and his mom. Meanwhile, he's still going to school and everything and keeping up his grades. You'll hear from Susan that Kathy would alternately kick him out again, say, get out of here, I don't want you here anymore, and then demand that he come back, even when he didn't want to. Several calls over the months from a variety of people, from Susan, from other family members, from Jeff Ratkin, saying that Kathy is suicidal, she has a gun in the house, she's threatened to kill herself, she actually does overdose a time or two. So that's what's going on in those months. In February, and it's going to be unclear exactly how all this occurs, but DCF gets involved again. Collin repeats that he doesn't feel safe at home with his mother. This is, after the suicide attempts and Baker acts for Kathy. He tells them, I'd rather be in DCF custody, I'd rather be in foster care, I'd rather be anywhere but at home with mom. I'm scared. DCF wants him to live full-time with Susan. Kathy will not have it. Detective Zanoniani is saying, all these people have intervened and tried to come up with a solution. Kathy will not have it. Somehow, Collin ends up back with mom, but because he doesn't feel safe, he runs away again, telling everybody, I don't feel safe. Law enforcement gets involved again. They find a gun in the home, which Kathy had lied to them about and said, oh no, I gave it to somebody else for safekeeping. Oh no, there's a gun there. She also claims that Collin attacked her again to law enforcement. She said he was trying to run away and he battered me. So the sheriff's deputies look at her Ring video and they're like, there was no battery. She tried to step in front of him and block him from leaving, escaping the situation, and may have brushed by her. That's what she was calling a battery and trying to get him arrested. But then she would have probably demanded that he come back home with her. Needless to say, much chaos. In March, in what I hope is a little bit of positive news in all of this, Collin gets his driver's license and he gets a job at Domino's. And he did get a car. Kathy didn't buy him the car like she wants everybody to believe. It came from a trust that existed separate from Kathy. He's still going back and forth between Susan and Kathy, managing to accomplish things as a 17-year-old, 16 and 17-year-old. And then we get to the end of August, beginning of September of 2024. And you'll see a text from Kathy in the end of August saying to her mom and to other people, I'm going into that dark place again. My therapist thinks I should go to a facility for at least a few days, but she doesn't. September 7th, you heard about the whole bookshelf thing. There was, in fact, an argument over whether Collin would help her put up a bookshelf. And he is not being entirely respectful to her when he says, it'll take too long, I have to go to work. Also, there aren't studs on that wall. If we put it up there, it's going to fall and it's probably going to hurt someone. So did he help her put up the bookshelf? Absolutely not. Should he have? Maybe. But he didn't. And this is Kathy's reaction, and you will hear her words and see her. Get out and don't come back. Even if you're bawling your eyes out. And give me the keys to the house. So Collin's gathering things. He goes out the door. You may or may not see her opening the door, and then closing it and locking it with his keys to the locked house inside. So Collin, being kicked out again, calls Susan, who is a concurrent guardian. By the way, Collin had been put on probation for the domestic violence battery, and his probation officer's name was Monique. You'll hear about her. And the court had said that even though most of the time you're not allowed to go out of the county when you're on probation unless you're with a parent, it's okay for Collin to go visit his grandmother in another county. Just got to let Monique know. Okay? So Collin emails Monique, says, I'm going to my grandmother's. Called his grandmother, said, Mom kicked me out. Can I go to your house? She said, sure. She says, I'm in the keys right now, but I'll be there tomorrow. Okay, so it wasn't like he was secretly going to this place where he can have a rager. This is something that has happened multiple times. So he drives to Polk County, and you'll hear from the neighbors that his car got there on Saturday and did not move. So, meanwhile, Kathy is getting worked up, to say the least, angry. I think one detective may describe her as manic. She starts in the early morning hours of Sunday the 8th making repeated calls to Susan and to Collin, and will beg, plead, yell, cuss, call people names. She calls her mom a fucking moron. She is all over the place, insisting that Collin come back home. But at the same time, she'd say, I reported the car stolen because the car is not in your name, it's in both our names, and you're not allowed to drive that car. But you better get in that car and come right back home. But wait, I took money out of your bank account so you can't even afford to put gas in it, but you better come back home. Get in that car and come back home. I'm going to sell the car. I sold the car. I'm already up in Auburndale. I found a buyer whose aunt lives in that community and who gave me the gate code so I could come into the neighborhood in Auburndale, and I couldn't see the car at Susan's house. You're in big trouble because I already sold that car. She was nowhere near Auburndale. You'll see the ring video. She was at her home. But she made up this elaborate story about having gone to Auburndale, gotten the gate code from the buyer's aunt, and going in and not seeing the car when the neighbors were like, the car never left. She is doing everything she can to get Collin to come home. She calls law enforcement, Detective Zanoniani and Corporal Rentis. There's no secret that Collin is in Auburndale and that his grandmother has okayed it. It's okay with his probation officer. Everybody tells Kathy, let him stay in Auburndale. Let him stay in Auburndale. Let him stay in Auburndale. Kathy claims on one of her phone calls that the police gave her 24 hours of Collin being gone until she was going to get in trouble for him being a runaway. No. You'll read her texts, you'll listen to her messages. Despite everyone telling her, let Collin stay in Auburndale, she wasn't having it. She was the one who was angry. You'll hear Collin's voice when she says, are you coming home or not? No. Which is what law enforcement, Susan, everybody recommended, is that he don't go home. She went to him. She went to where he was safe. And the neighbors that you heard about will tell you that she came in hot and angry, that she sped into this quiet 55 and older community whipped her car into the driveway, whipped it back out, pulled in front of the house, got out, slammed the door, and marched up to the carport door. Collin was never in the yard where her earbud was. She went up to the house and went in the house, angry. Within a few minutes, Kathy comes back out of the house, unlocks Collin's car, and starts throwing all of his stuff into it. And then after she's done throwing his stuff into it, you'll hear the neighbors say that she was yelling and shaking her fist, and it looked like she was the one who was being aggressive, and that Collin was standing in the doorway. So there's a door that goes into the living room and out to the carport, and that he was standing in the doorway. And when she comes up and you'll hear varying terms. You'll hear that he put his hand on her shoulder by where her ponytail was and kind of brought her inside. I don't know that you'll hear a neighbor say that he dragged her from the yard by her ponytail, by her hair. They will say that they heard her yelling. You can evaluate whether you think Collin was doing anything at that point to harm her. That's going to be part of your decision. Or if you think he was trying to avoid her making a scene in the community where teenagers aren't supposed to be living, you'll hear from the neighbors that they had seen Collin there before. He was never a problem. He would visit Susan because, like I said, he went back and forth, but they had never seen Kathy there before, ever. So, Kathy and Collin go back into the house, and it's about an hour later that Collin calls 911, crying, upset, saying, "We got in a long fight. My mother's bleeding out. Please send someone right away." The 911 operator explains how to do CPR, tells him to move her, to lay her on her back, to be able to do CPR. You'll hear him doing CPR on her while counting with the 911 operator. And intermittently he'll say, "Just send someone, she's not bleeding anymore." And when first responders get there, she was already dead. What you're going to have to decide at the end of all this, and by the way, Collin has wounds too, is whether the state has proved to you beyond a reasonable doubt that what they claim happened, that Collin somehow planned this, he's been plotting it for months, that he murdered and dragged his mom into the house that she went to, where he was safe, to kill her, or whether what Collin had been saying he was afraid would happen, and that had happened in the past, actually was what occurred. That his mom came to him, went into the house where he was safe, and attacked him, and he had to defend himself. And that he is not guilty of the murder or the kidnapping of his mother.
Thank you, Ms. Thornton. All right, folks, it's almost 10:30. We'll take our mid-morning recess of about 15 minutes. Remember not to discuss the case among yourselves or look anything up. Please leave your notepads in the chairs.
All rise, please.
Please be seated. State, call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. State calls forensic investigator Laura Ellis with the Polk County Sheriff's Office.
Step this way. Stand right here, raise your right hand for the business for you.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay, step around.
Just want you to step on up, Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
Proceed.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am. Will you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your name for the record?
My name is Laura Ellis, Loraellis.
And where are you employed?
I'm employed at the Polk County Sheriff's Office.
Tell the jury about your education and training and experience.
I have 800 hours of on-the-job training with the Polk County Sheriff's Office, and our education is ongoing. So they offer us education as the year goes on with classes through the agency.
What is your job title at the Sheriff's Office?
Forensic investigator.
What does that mean?
We respond to multiple calls for service. We obtain digital photographs, collect evidence, and process scenes as needed.
Have you been to a number of homicide scenes during your career?
Yes, sir.
Have you also responded to other types of crime scenes?
Yes, sir.
Now, this particular case, I want to direct your attention to September 8th of last year. Do you recall how you became involved with the case?
We received a call from our dispatch center requesting us to respond to the address.
And where did you respond to?
77 Hewlett Drive in Auburndale.
And is that in Polk County?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you have any basic information en route to the scene?
We were just informed that we needed to respond and call in reference to a death investigation.
When you get there, what do you see first, or who do you see first?
I make contact with Detective Peters and forensic investigator Bange.
Is Detective Peters Detective Danny Peters with the Homicide Division?
Correct, yes, sir.
And did he end up being the lead detective in this case?
Yes, sir.
Without telling us anything he might have said, did he kind of give you a little briefing of what was going on?
Yes, sir.
What did you do next?
We waited for a search warrant to be obtained for the property.
And after the search warrant was obtained, did that give you legal authority to then do whatever you wanted to do to process the scene effectively?
Correct.
About what time were you there that evening?
What time did I arrive on scene?
Yes.
At approximately 19:09 hours.
All right, that's 7:09 p.m.?
Yes.
Now, what was your first order of business once the search warrant was approved and you took the next step?
We started obtaining digital photographs of the scene as observed.
Were you able to see both inside the house and outside the house?
Yes.
And what type of community was it in general?
More like a senior living community. It was multiple mobile homes.
Were the homes did they appear to be well taken care of?
Yes, sir.
Like nicely manicured lawns?
Yes.
The houses were in order?
Yes.
Now, outside the residence, did you get an opportunity to see a couple of cars that were there at the scene?
I did.
What color and what make of cars were those?
One was a white Volkswagen Jetta, and one was a black Volkswagen Jetta.
Where was the black Jetta?
It was underneath the carport on the south side of the residence.
And how about the white car?
It was in the roadway, west of the residence.
Was it parked?
Yes.
Now, have you had an opportunity previously to see States Exhibits 1 through 99? That also includes 77A and 77B?
Yes, sir.
And are those photographs that you took that document the scene and some things that you saw impounded at the scene?
Yes, sir.
Did they fairly accurately depict everything?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, the state removes States 1 through 99, which also includes 77A and 77B in evidence.
Any objection? Yes, sir. They are received.
Now, in addition to that, at some later date, were you able to take some aerial photographs?
Yes, sir.
And how do you do that?
We respond to the PCSO hangar in Bartow, and then they take us via helicopter, and we fly over the area and obtain digital photographs from the helicopter.
And are those depicted in State Exhibits 167 through 169, in addition to a Google map overhead?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move States 167 to 169 in evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
They are received.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about, before we publish the photographs, the overhead aerial photographs. Do those show like how the neighbors' houses are situated across the street?
Yes, sir.
So kind of give a vantage point of what people might see from different locations depending on where they lived in relationship to the crime scene?
Yes, sir.
Now, in general, when you go to a crime scene, besides what you physically do, what are your objectives in terms of the integrity of the scene?
We do everything possible to protect the scene and any evidence that may be in it. So we pretty much limit who is in and out. It's mostly our homicide detectives as well as our forensic investigators that come in and out of the scene.
Now, the homicide detectives that are there, are they all doing like different things and have different responsibilities?
Yes.
Does anybody tell you what to do, or do you know what you need to do?
So we have a crime scene detective that typically will stay with us throughout the entire time that we're on the crime scene, and they tell us what they want us to collect or what they want specific photographs of while we're on scene.
All right, with the court's permission, I'd like to publish the photographs. Thank you. I may have some questions for you on a lot of these photographs, some perhaps not. But not surprisingly, we're going to start with State Exhibit 1. Can you see it on your screen as well?
Yes, sir.
Can you jurors as well see it? Okay. Tell the jury about what information that provides.
So this puts the date that we arrived, the date that the time that I'm going to start taking my photographs, our case number that's provided by the agency, what kind of investigation or call that I've responded to, the address, the city, who the victim is, and who my detective for the case is.
And what time did you start taking the photographs?
21:54.
And what does that mean?
That's the military time. It was 9:54, I believe.
All right. As we continue on, State Exhibit number 2. This?
That is the outside of the residence.
And is the black car and the white car, the Volkswagens, are they visible there?
Yes.
State Exhibit 3. State Exhibit 4. Now, in State Exhibit 4, is there an entryway, like a doorway into the house?
There is. It's along the north side of that carport.
To the left of the black car?
Correct.
And I notice in the bottom left corner there appears to be some mulch. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
State Exhibit 5, is that the doorway you spoke of?
Correct. Yes, sir.
State Exhibit 6. Did you notice something in the mulch that caught your attention when you were documenting the scene?
Yes, sir.
State Exhibit 7. Is that a close-up of what you noticed?
Yes, sir.
And what was that?
It's a white AirPod.
State Exhibit 8. State Exhibit 9. On the trunk of the black Volkswagen appears to be something. What is that?
It is a set of keys.
Going back to State Exhibit 9, did that appear to include also a car key?
Yes, sir.
State Exhibit 10, outside and out. State Exhibit 11. The first interior shot in this sequence. That kind of situate the jury to what they're looking at.
So that's the living room of the residence?
The door that's visible kind of in the upper left-hand corner, is that the door we saw from the outside?
Yes.
So if somebody drags somebody in through near the carport, would that be the entranceway?
Objection. Calls for speculation.
If somebody drags somebody in through right next to the carport, would that be the door that they would enter through?
Yes.
It appears that there's something white on the wood floor. Is that correct?
Yes.
State Exhibit 12. Now, how would you describe the interior of the house? Not the actual where Kathy laid, but the rest of the house. How was it?
Very well maintained, very clean, very organized.
State Exhibit number 13. What is that?
It is another white AirPod.
Did it appear to be the matching one or a similar one to the one found in the mulch?
Yes.
State Exhibit 14. Do you know what that is?
It is the case for the earbuds.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but so the AirPod outside, the AirPod inside, and the case for the AirPods, once you get inside, does that start going back towards where you ended up finding Kathy on the floor?
Yes.
State Exhibit 15. What do you see kind of in the background there? Where does that pathway lead to? If you go all the way back, does that enter the kitchen?
It does, yes.
Now, in your route to the kitchen, did anything look like it was knocked over or messed up, or did everything look pretty clean and in place?
It looks pretty clean and in place.
State Exhibit 16. Is this a picture of the kitchen?
Yes.
Now, the island, the bar of the island there, is the victim on the other side of that.
Yes.
That's a sliding door there? Is that a sliding glass door?
Yes, sir.
State Exhibit 17. That's an entryway and an exitway?
Yes.
All right, now State Exhibit 18. To the left of that sliding glass door, are there a washing machine and dryer maybe?
Yes.
Did you see a knife at the scene?
Yes.
And is that knife visible in that photograph?
Yes.
This is State Exhibit 19. Is that a closer up of what appears to be a bloody knife?
Yes.
State Exhibit 20. State Exhibit 21. Is this a close-up of that same bloody knife?
Yes.
Now, the jurors may see for the first time a yellow marker with the number 10 on it. What does that mean?
It's how we show where evidence is in our photos, so it gives a better layout of where everything is in reference to each other.
Did you impound that knife?
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity to take a look at State Exhibit 199?
Yes.
And is that the knife, the bloody knife from the scene?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move State Exhibit 199 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
It is received.
Now, does the knife, and in a moment you'll have an opportunity to show the jury the knife, but does the knife look different today as opposed to when it's in the picture there?
Yes.
And why is that?
May I refer to my report?
Yes, ma'am.
On Wednesday, January 22nd, Detective Peters placed the knife into a temporary evidence locker in the Forensic Investigations Office for me to process for possible latent prints.
And when you process an item for latent prints, describe to the jury what's the process and what does that mean?
So, in this case in particular, I took a chemical agent called Sudan Black, which helps us see latent prints that may possibly be in blood.
And what are latent prints?
Latent prints are fingerprints that are left behind from the oils on your hands.
So hypothetically, if somebody puts their thumbprint on something, you might be able to visibly see some prints?
Possibly.
Or perhaps doing what you were doing, you might be able to lift some prints that might not quite be visible to the human eye?
Yes.
Now, before that knife got to you for that work request, had it previously gone to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Yes.
And at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, did they process evidentiary items for the presence of DNA and or fingerprints, depending on what the request is?
Yes.
And without saying anything about any results or anything, but did FDLE do their analysis on the knife for DNA before you did your fingerprint analysis?
Yes.
Now, do the detectives under a crime scene have to kind of think about which one to do first, or if both are feasible?
It's up to the lead detective on the case, if they want us to process it first, or if they would like it to go to FDLE first.
And is that a calculated decision that the detective could speak about?
Yes.
Now, so tell the jury about what did you actually do? I know you described it a little bit. What's that process like?
So it is a chemical agent that is black in color, and we cover whatever the area is that's covered in apparent blood. We cover it in that chemical. We let it sit for a minute, and then we wash it off, and we can also repeat it to try and darken any possible latent prints on the item.
Where do you do that?
I did it at the Forensic Investigations Office in Winter Haven.
And that's a secure, clean place?
Yes.
After you did all that, what were your results?
I was met with negative results.
Does that mean there were no latent prints that you were able to see or lift that could be compared to anything?
Yes.
And did you have an opinion about, is it difficult to get latent prints after an item's already been processed for DNA?
I don't particularly have an opinion on that.
Okay. So at the end of your results, in essence, you couldn't decide that there was anybody's fingerprints on that knife, correct?
Correct.
And are there certain reasons why somebody may leave a fingerprint or not leave a fingerprint?
Yes.
And fingerprints are not always left on an item, correct? Even if somebody handles it?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
All right. Your Honor, could Forensic Investigator Ellis get off the witness stand to show the jury the knife? Thank you. For the record, the State Exhibit 199 will be shown to the jury by Investigator Ellis.
Ladies and gentlemen, I do want to advise you that any item that's received in evidence will go back with you to the jury room during deliberations, so you'll have plenty of time to examine anything that's received. But from time to time, the parties may wish to publish evidence here in open court.
Okay, make sure all the jurors can see it, and then you can have a seat. All right, thank you, Ms.
Yes.
All right, we'll continue on with the photographs. State Exhibit number 22. Now, what is approximately the total length of that knife, blade and handle?
12 inches or 1 foot.
And then in terms of the actual knife blade, approximately how many inches is the knife blade?
It's approximately 7.
You said 7 inches?
Yes, sir.
Now, State Exhibit 23, could you situate us to, if you continue to the left on that photograph, where are you headed towards?
Back towards that living room area.
The living room and then eventually the door that we saw earlier?
Yes.
And does that give a view of what you were describing in 24?
Yes.
25. What begins to be visible in State Exhibit 25?
The victim.
Now, on the left side of the photograph, is that some of the sliding glass door blinds?
Yes.
So is it a fair statement her head seems to be fairly close to that area?
Yes.
Above her head on the floor, what is that pictured?
It's a brown purse backpack.
All right, State Exhibit 26. Is that who you would later find out to be Kathy Griffith?
Yes.
The blood that you noticed at this scene, is that one of the first pictures of the blood and how high it went?
Yes.
Is it a fair statement that the blood didn't go super high up on the walls or the cabinets, but seemed more down low?
Yes.
27. Now, in 27, what's the white thing and the gray thing by her head?
So the white thing is a towel, and the gray thing is a shirt.
Is the neck or the stab wound visible a little bit there?
Yes.
It's on the right side of her neck, is that correct?
Yes.
28. As we get closer to the purse / backpack you described, was blood clearly visible all over it?
Yes.
And that surface area, is that kind of what, if somebody put it on their back, that would be touching their back?
Yes.
29. I want to ask you about, in this upper corner here, your upper right-hand corner, there appears to be coagulated blood, is that correct?
Yes.
What does coagulated mean?
It's when blood has been sitting for quite a bit of time, it starts to gather together.
Did you document also the blood inside and outside the purse?
Yes.
Is that blood between the deputy's wrists there?
Yes.
Is that blood all in the interior of the purse as well?
Yes.
For the record, that's State Exhibit 31. State Exhibit 32. State Exhibit 33. What's that pink zipper pouch?
It was a makeup bag that she had within the brown purse backpack.
Did it appear there was blood on that as well?
Yes.
34. Does that show a wallet?
Yes.
35. Is there blood on that wallet?
Yes.
36. Whose driver's license and whose picture is that?
That's the victim's driver's license.
Were you able to determine, obviously, that the purse and the contents were Kathy's?
Yes.
37. Was Kathy wearing basically a black T-shirt and some jean shorts?
Yes.
Was she also at one point wearing some Under Armour flip-flops?
I do not know if she was wearing Under Armour flip-flops at one point.
Did you see some Under Armour flip-flops close to her body?
Yes.
But how they got there, you're unaware?
Correct.
Now, it appears that her arm from approximately her upper forearm / elbow area is obstructed. Was her arm under something?
Yes. Her arm was under the kitchen island.
38. Is that the neck wound?
Yes.
39. 40. 41. Tell the jury about why do you put a ruler up next to the neck wound?
It shows length and width of the injuries on the victim's body.
And is that wound basically wide open?
Yes.
All right, 42. Is that the dishwasher?
Yes.
What's the red thing? The red stuff.
It's apparent blood.
And is that to the left of that same dishwasher?
Yes.
Now going back to 42 for a second. In front of the dishwasher, is that same kitchen island?
Yes.
And Kathy's on basically like the other side of it, correct?
Yes.
Do you know how the blood got all the way over there?
I do not.
Continuing on to 44. In the forefront, or front of the photograph there, is that same kitchen island?
Yes.
Now, Is the knife block from which the knife came from visible in this photograph?
Yes.
Going back for a moment. Where in this photograph is it visible?
It's to the left of the stove.
Is it kind of like a wooden block there?
Yes.
And were there a number of knives still in the block?
Yes.
And then, of course, an empty space for the knife you located?
Yes.
45. Now, is this obviously of Kathy's legs and feet?
Yes.
And by her feet, what were the four items that you found on the floor there?
There was a left flip-flop, a right flip-flop, 2 phone charging cords, and a set of keys.
Is that blood on the cupboard in the upper left of the photograph?
Yes.
48. Are those the items you mentioned?
Yes.
And it appears that there's an Under Armour logo on one of the flip-flops. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does that appear to be apparent blood in State Exhibit 49 on the bottom of Kathy's flip-flop?
Yes.
In State Exhibit 50, does there appear to be some apparent blood on the other flip-flop?
Yes.
And those are a matching pair, is that correct? Both Under Armour? In State Exhibit number 51, does there appear to be blood underneath the chargers?
Yes.
52, 53, 54. Did you see various marks and bruises and or scrapes on Kathy's legs and feet, or Kathy's legs?
Yes.
Continuing on with 55 and 56. All right, going to 57. Does that show what you were describing, her right arm being under the kitchen island?
Yes.
Going back to 57. The bottom of the island, does there appear to be a lot of blood near her arm, extending to the left and the right?
Yes.
And on that single door by the shelves, is that blood?
Yes.
$59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66. Is the knife block much more apparent in this photograph?
Yes.
You mentioned to the left of the stove on the countertop.
Yes, sir.
67, 68, 69. Now, in 69, is there something on the island that caught your attention?
Yes, sir.
And what was that?
The victim's cell phone.
And it appears that the countertop of that kitchen island is pristine and nothing knocked over, no problems.
Yes, sir.
In 71, is that a close-up of Kathy's cell phone?
Yes, sir.
And the time at that point was 11:09 on Sunday, September 8th, as you're taking photographs?
Yes, sir.
Now, on the screen, there appears to be some pictures or icons. Were you able to kind of take a close-up and figure out what those were? Can you see on your screen?
Yes, sir. They were notifications on her phone.
And who did she get notifications from? Can you read the print?
She had a missed call from Susan Deathman, and it appears a text message from a Detective Lacey.
And are you able to see a little bit of the content of that text message from the detective?
Yes, sir.
What does it say?
I tried to call you.
In 73, there appears to be some yellow tape and rulers. What's the purpose of that?
That is for us to do bloodstain documentation.
I also noticed that the island appears to no longer be there in the kitchen, exposing Kathy's right arm and hand and watch. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
How did you move the island?
We had about 3 or 4 of the homicide detectives move the island.
And was that in order to document what was underneath the island?
It was in an effort to preserve any blood, apparent blood that may be on the floor underneath and around the victim.
And does 74 show some additional blood that would have been under the island by the victim's right hand?
Yes.
75. Is that the white towel and the gray shirt you mentioned earlier?
Yes.
Now, from 75 to 76, did you pick up the gray shirt to investigate further?
Yes.
What does 76 show?
It's an apparent slit in the gray t-shirt.
And are you aware of how that got there?
I am not.
Are you aware when that got there?
No.
Are you aware of who did that?
No.
77. What's that show?
It's a small hole in the shirt.
Where on the shirt is that? Do you know, like front or back? Do you remember?
It's the back left shoulder of the shirt.
Do you know what caused that?
No.
Do you know how it got there?
No.
When it got there?
No.
Who did that to that shirt?
No.
Whether it was purposeful or accidental?
No.
All right, as we move on to 77A, is that same shirt?
Yes.
And where do you take that photograph of the shirt?
I was at the forensic investigations office.
And is that like a gray camo shirt?
Yes.
77B appears to be a close-up. What was the purpose of the close-up? What does it show?
It's showing apparent blood
Where on that shirt is the apparent blood?
underneath the collar of the shirt.
And I believe you might be able to point to something on the screen with a mouse.
Mouse up there on the.
This.
If you could, for everybody's benefit, kind of show where the apparent blood is.
It is about right here on the shirt.
Okay. All right, moving on to 78. Is that Kathy's feet,
Yes.
foot, excuse me, and there's apparent blood all over her foot?
Yes.
Carrying on with 79 and 80. 81. 82. Were you able to see bruises on different parts of her arms and legs?
Yes.
83. Now in 84, I take it at this point, Kathy had been taken away. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does this show what would have been underneath Kathy's body,
Yes.
including the coagulated blood at the top of the photograph you mentioned?
Yes.
Okay, for the record, that was 85. Now we go outside. 86, is that black Volkswagen that was right by the door, by the carport?
Yes.
The interior of the car in 87, did you find a cell phone in that car?
Yes.
And a computer,
Yes.
laptop? 88, is that the black cell phone?
Yes.
And were you able to determine this was the defendant's car and the white car was Kathy's car?
I wasn't made aware of which car was which on scene.
Did you find that out later?
Yes.
Your appeals, excuse me. The next photograph, which is 89. What does that say on that paperwork?
It says the R. Fred Lewis 2021 Florida High School mock trial competition.
And then 90, is that a continuation of that paperwork?
Yes.
And what's the subject matter of that? If you could read what you're able to make out.
Would you like me to read what I can from
Yes.
this? The victim, a Caucasian male, approximately 5'11" in height and weighing approximately 235 pounds. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the back of the head, caused by a smooth, rounded object, cylindrical in shape, consistent with a tire iron. The blow to the head lacerated the skin, causing substantial bleeding, and crushed the skull, causing bone fragments to become embedded in the brain. The time of death is estimated to have been between 10 and 11:30 p.m. on January 3rd, 2020. The defendant's criminal record includes convictions for the misdemeanors of battery, disorderly intoxication, trespass, and vandalism, and the felony offense of cultivation of marijuana.
And for the record, this has nothing to do with the defendant, correct?
Correct.
Okay, continue.
The first two convictions were in 2011 and grew out of a barroom fight. The trespass and vandalism charges relate to a protest by the defendant and several others at the Pinnacle Paper Company on Thanksgiving Day 2019, during which windows and doors were spray painted with red paint and a load of manure was dumped at the entrance of the administrative building. The drug conviction was in 2004. Of the registered vehicles in Canton County, there are 414 Ford F-150.
And where was this paperwork found?
It was in the black Jetta.
91. Is that a wallet?
Yes.
92, when you opened the wallet, whose ID did you find?
Collin Griffith?
93, is this the back seat?
Yes.
And on the rear left floorboard, was there a uniform of some type?
Yes.
And did you find out upon closer inspection it was a Domino's work uniform?
Yes.
95, going to the car parked on the street, is that what you would later find out to be Kathy's white Volkswagen?
Yes.
96, was it clean inside?
Yes.
And did you find any objects of note in the front seat?
No.
Did you find any objects of note in the back seat?
No.
Were any firearms or weapons found in her car?
No, sir.
Going to 98, pop the trunk open. What did you see in the trunk?
An organizer and just some mix and match bags.
And then finally 99, did there appear to be some like grocery bags maybe?
Yes.
All right, now we're going to segue briefly to 167 to 169. Going to the aerial overheads. Thank you. All right, 167. Could you please point to the jury, point for the jury with the red arrow again, where the crime scene house is located? All right, so that's the carport, the driveway, the mulch you can kind of see, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then the two houses that seem to be most directly across the street, could you put the arrow on those two houses? All right, thank you. And then 168, could you point to the crime scene house? All right. And the houses across the street. And then finally, the last photograph. That's the crime scene house there. And all right, thank you. Now, describe to the jury in a general sense, when you see evidence or things that might be evidence, how do you impound it, or what do you do with it?
So we first talk to our detective on scene, whoever our homicide detective is, or any general detective, depending on the type of call that it is, and we confirm with them that they want it collected as an item of evidence. We take brown paper bags with us into scenes, and we will write the time that we've collected it, what the item is, and where we've collected it from. And then we put them all together, and we will take them back with us to the office to put in a temporary evidence locker.
Did you take fingernail swabbings and/or clippings from the victim?
Yes.
Describe to the jury what that means and how you did that.
So we first got permission from the medical examiner to be able to do that on scene, but for swabbings, we take a wet cotton swab that we wet with water, and then we take a dry cotton swab and we rub underneath the fingernails of the victim, and then we will also take fingernail clippers and clip the victim's fingernails and place them in a small manila envelope that has a glassine envelope in it as well.
And can your end product then be sent to FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, for them to do any analysis that they want to do,
Yes.
such as DNA comparisons or things of that nature?
Yes.
Now, between the victim's right hand, between her index finger and her thumb, and like the webbing there, did you notice an injury?
Yes.
Did you describe it as a laceration?
Yes.
Now, when a victim is taken to the medical examiner's office, do they take photographs that document the body, the injuries, the external and the internal?
Yes.
All right, Investigator Ellis, I don't have any further questions for you.
Investigator Ellis, I just have a few questions for you. When you took the pictures that have been shown to the jury today, that was many hours after Kathy Griffith died, correct?
I am not sure of the exact time of death for her.
Well, you responded at about 7,
Yes.
right? And you didn't take pictures until after 9.
Yes.
So at least those 2 hours, if not longer.
Correct.
And during those 2 hours, you don't know who all was in that kitchen, do you?
No.
And before you even arrived on scene, at about 7, you don't know who was in that kitchen?
No.
Are you aware that first responders or emergency medical technicians did respond to the scene to perform life-saving functions on Kathy Griffith?
Yes.
And you're aware of that partly because she had some of the stickers that they use on her body, right?
Yes.
The area where Kathy Griffith was laying is a fairly tight area, right?
Yes.
So, have you been on scenes before when emergency medical technicians are trying to revive someone or save their lives?
I have not been present while they are performing life-saving measures. I've been present after the fact.
Okay, so you're not aware of how frantic it is and how many people have to get close to the body.
Correct.
Okay, but it's at least possible that first responders or emergency medical technicians may have altered the kitchen in some way, not on purpose, but in their efforts to save Kathy Griffith.
Yes.
May have stepped on things, right, like blood,
Yes.
and they may have moved items that got in their way, right,
Yes.
like the bag that we saw in the picture.
Yes.
The are you also aware that Collin Griffith actually performed CPR for quite some time on Kathy Griffith before anybody else responded to the scene?
I did not know anything pertaining to him prior to my arrival.
Have you been trained in how to do CPR on somebody?
Yes.
And one of the first things anyone is instructed to do is to lay the person flat on their back, right?
Yes.
And that's enabling the person who's performing CPR to get a good surface upon which to do the chest compressions, right?
Yes.
So you have no idea what position Kathy Griffith was in either when she suffered the wound to her neck or shortly after she suffered the wound to her neck.
Correct.
Are you aware at all of the mechanics of how wounds work?
I do not have any experience with wounds.
Okay. I'll save that for somebody else then. The flip-flops that you spoke about, they were actually reversed, right? Like the left one was on the right and the right one was on the left in the picture?
Yes.
And one was turned upside down?
Yes.
So it wasn't like somebody just fell back out of their shoes, right?
It could be possible, yes.
And then they flipped and one turned over?
Yes.
The island, you mentioned it took 3 to 4 detectives to lift it and move it. So it wasn't like you could just touch it or bump against it and it would move like this on wheels.
Correct. It was pretty heavy.
The shirt that you talked about in the photos, was it actually determined that that shirt belonged to Collin Griffith?
I was never informed if it actually belonged to him. It just had Collin Griffith's name written on the inside of the shirt.
And that shirt was recovered from around Kathy Griffith's neck,
Above her head.
above her head.
Yes,
Okay.
on the floor above her head.
Okay. So like it had been possibly taken off and used to either support her head or try and stop the wound from bleeding?
Possibly.
It was right near towels that were possibly serving that purpose as well, right?
Yes.
And did you take pictures of Collin ever?
I did not. I never made contact with Collin.
All right. The slit that you mentioned on the shirt, where was it on the shirt?
It was on the lower, more midsection left side of the shirt.
So like the torso area?
About right here. Yes.
Okay. Well, you're going to have to stand up and show the
Sorry.
jury because they can't see.
It's about right here.
Right here?
Yes.
Okay, so front left side of his stomach area.
Yes.
And you said you never made contact with Collin, so you never took the photographs of him.
I did not. That was forensic investigator Bange.
The keys that were seen on the trunk of the black Jetta,
Yes.
that key ring contained several keys on it, right?
Yes.
And although that key ring with keys was on top of the black Jetta, it actually contained the keys to the white Jetta that was parked in the street, right?
I'm not sure.
So you didn't.
I did not unlock the vehicles. The detectives unlocked the vehicles.
Okay. Well, let me put it this way: the keys that were in the kitchen,
Yes.
it was on a round key ring, right, with just a car key.
Yes.
Okay. So did you test that to see that it actually belongs to the black Jetta?
I did not do anything as far as unlocking or locking vehicles.
And when you log evidence, you don't mention like key ring because there are 2 Jettas here, specifying which one the keys go to.
I specified what was on the key rings, but I didn't know what car key in particular went to each car.
The key ring that had just one car key on it, it had no other keys, right?
Correct.
No house keys.
Correct.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Any redirect?
No, thank you.
Is the witness released?
Yes, sir. I'm still remain on standby for later on.
All right. You're free to go for the day. If you're needed back, you'll get a phone call. Thank you. Would you approach off the record briefly? Just housekeeping. to suggest exactly what limiting instruction or warning I should give the witness?
I think it should be limited to, he conducted an investigation as part of whatever law enforcement agency he belonged to then into a shooting death. I don't think it should say at home, because Collin being 15 at the time, I think this jury could jump to some conclusions that might lead them to believe that it was a family member. So just a shooting death, an investigation. There were 2 shots, and that Collin was a suspect and was arrested, but that he was never charged up to today.
Mr. William?
Your Honor, I would propose in conformance with the court's ruling a week or 2 ago that the officer will testify that he was one of the first responders to the scene of a shooting. I don't have a problem not saying that it was a house. That the person that was killed was shot 2 times. Your Honor mentioned that I could ask the question about, or that the answer would be acceptable to be shot 2 times, once in the chest, 1 in the head. That it was not in dispute that the defendant was the person that shot and killed the individual. That the defendant was investigated and arrested for the killing. And as of today's date, he has not been indicted for any crimes, and the case remains under investigation.
Remaining under investigation, I don't think that that's appropriate.
We've discussed this previously, and I think, if I remember correctly, it's not something I said. I know I at least thought it, that the time that's relevant as to whether it was pending, the investigation was pending, would have been at the time of the alleged murder, because that goes hand in hand with motive, potentially. But that anything beyond that, I do not believe. At this point, I could see how it might become relevant, but at this point is not relevant. So if the witness knows if at the time of this case, or if this incident, it was still an open matter.
I mean, we could have him say that the state attorney or district attorney from Oklahoma reviewed everything and opted not to file charges, period. I mean, they weren't investigating it in September of 2024.
Well, we all know that that doesn't matter. I mean, investigations are reopened all the time. So what is it you anticipate he's going to say about the time around?
If Your Honor is saying that would be confined to when she sent the text on that date, September 8th of 2024, then my understanding is that the officer would say yes, the case was still open and under investigation.
That's not your understanding of what he
No,
would say?
not at all.
All right, well, he's on his way up. You can take a short break for you two to go talk to him in the hallway.
Right. Yeah. Why do we have to say anything about whether the investigation is still open or not?
Well, Your Honor,
Or was at the time or wasn't at the time?
it sounds like the defense wants the jury to know that he wasn't charged, and the prosecutor's office reviewed it in Oklahoma and chose not to charge it, which is, in essence, endorsing the defense position that it wasn't a crime, that it's done and over with, and that it was justified self-defense, which I think would be unfair to the state.
This Thornhill's point about open or not open is in some part well taken, but as I just said, you and I both know closed investigations are reopened all the time based on new evidence when there's no... I don't know for sure what the statute of limitations is in Oklahoma, but I imagine, like Florida, there is none for a murder, first-degree murder. So that's really the important point, is that while even if it had been closed, it could be reopened. But I don't know that you can get that out of this witness. I also understand the state's perspective that leaving that, we decided not to charge him with some determination affirmatively that he acted in self-defense, or that he was, for some other reason, not criminally responsible.
I am not insinuating, nor would I want to ask that was the final word forever. But where we are right now and where we were on September 8th of 2024 is that They had done an investigation. The state attorney's office had reviewed it. They had opted not to charge him, period. So us speculating what might or might not happen in the future, to either side, I think it would be unfair. And if they indicate that the investigation's open, that makes it sound like he's about to be charged with murder.
Well, I agree with that. Whatever's going on today or after the incident is not coming in and is not relevant. What was relevant and what I think a jury, if they need to know anything else, what they need to know is that a closed case doesn't necessarily mean closed forever. A decision not to prosecute is not binding forever.
How about if we say there was a decision not to file charges at that point? And leave it at that.
Mr. Levine?
Well, that's a true statement. I would ask them to go a little bit further. If I understood Your Honor correctly, you were saying what was the status of the investigation, the homicide investigation in Oklahoma on September 8th, 2024, which would be the relevant date of your inquiry.
And my understanding from Ms. Thornhill is that the decision had been made not to prosecute at that point.
In May of 2023.
What I was going to say is, regardless of what I think or what she thinks, I think what the witness understanding is would give the court some, I guess, final guidance on how you should rule. But if he says on September 8, 2024, it was still an open investigation, then I would ask to be able to elicit that. It's going to kind of help both sides in terms of it'll come out that the defendant was not charged. It's clear that he hasn't been charged, but on September 8th, which is the relevant date of 2024, if this witness knows that the case was still under investigation, but he hadn't been charged, then I would argue that's relevant and should be admissible.
But then that could imply that he's charged with it now.
I think I said in my opening statement, if I remember correctly, that he hasn't been indicted.
Here's what we're going to do so we can have a better than what if discussion about this is let you find out from the witness now what he would say in response to your question before I make a decision about it. I thought we had addressed this earlier, but perhaps that's all it was a thought, and we didn't.
He's probably outside, so the defense and I can step out and get that resolved.
All right.
Can
Should we?
Can we have him come in and proffer it so it's on the
Sure.
record? Thanks.
If you could, Deputy, if you could get Officer Christopher Hyde.
Sir, you can just stand at the podium right there.
Raise your right hand, sworn about those.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Mr. Levine?
Thank you. Officer Hyde, very narrow, specific question. On the date of September 8th, 2024, when Kathy sent a text message to her son, Collin Griffith, regarding exposing some evidence regarding the Oklahoma murder, to your understanding, on that date of September 8th of 2024, was the homicide case still under investigation?
Yes.
And at that time, is it a true statement the defendant had not been charged or indicted on any official charges by Oklahoma as it pertained to the shooting? Is that correct?
That is correct.
For these purposes, I don't have any other questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Thornhill?
Officer Hyde, when did you leave the sheriff's office that investigated this case?
In 2024.
When in 2024?
June or July.
So before September 8th of 2024.
That is correct.
So, and you were fired by them?
Yes.
Okay, so you have no idea what they're doing on this case in Oklahoma, do you?
I have spoken with the district attorney's office there.
Okay,
Yes.
and what has the district attorney's office told you specifically?
That the case is still pending investigation.
Who told you that?
District Attorney Thompson, I believe is what I was saying.
When did they tell you this? After September 8th of 2024?
That is correct.
So on September 8th of 2024, you have no idea what the state attorney's office position was other than they had not charged Collin Griffith.
On that date in particular?
Yes.
That is correct. I
Okay.
do not know on that date.
And then after Kathy Griffith died, you contacted the state attorney's office in Oklahoma and said, by the way, we have this text message. There might be some ring videos of him admitting to planning the death of his father. So I think, that was the basis of them pending an investigation, right?
I have no knowledge of a text message.
Okay. So what happened after September 8th, 2024, that you were in contact with the district attorney's office in Oklahoma about Collin Griffith at all?
I was able to read the entirety of the OSBI's report. I don't believe that they were able to read the entirety of it.
Who wasn't?
The district attorney's office. I don't believe that they received the entirety of it
Why would you have received it if you were no longer with the sheriff's office?
because I requested it
Why did you request it?
to be able to see if it needed to be reopened.
Right, based
Right.
on this.
I had not previously seen it.
Okay. The timing
Your Honor, I can solve this. I'm not going to be answering.
The timing. February of 2023, Collin Griffith is arrested for the death of his father.
Correct.
By May of 2023, the District Attorney's Office in Oklahoma said, we are not filing charges against Collin Griffith in the death of his father, correct?
I believe that is correct, that time frame. Yes.
So that's another thing I was worried about. I believe that's correct. Okay.
It's a question.
So-
You can argue outside his presence.
So Collin, his bond is discharged in Oklahoma, right?
I'm unsure of that.
Okay. So the District Attorney's Office says, despite this investigation that the Sheriff's Office, and I don't remember the county, Lincoln County, and despite the investigation by OSBI, we are not filing charges against Collin Griffith in the death of his father, correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay, and then you heard nothing about Collin Griffith again until September 8th of 2024, or around that time?
I don't believe so.
Okay, so it was after Kathy Griffith died that this whole investigation into Collin Griffith and the death of his father came back up? So far as you know.
To my knowledge, yes.
Any additional questions for purposes of the proffer?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Would you step outside, please?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Thornhill?
So I think Officer Hyde has established that on September 8th of 2024, there was no ongoing investigation into the death of Collin's father. So it's irrelevant that they're now investigating again.
I agree with that they're now investigating him again, but Mr. Levine?
Your Honor, I'm not going to ask about the status of the investigation on September 8th, 2024, which is when Your Honor said would be relevant. So I don't intend on asking after hearing the officer's answers. But I believe that he didn't know what the status of it was September 8th, 2024, which is kind of neither here nor there because I'm not going to ask about it. But it didn't sound like he knew what the status was. Now, so I'm not going to ask about the status of it.
So that raises another concern that I brought up when Your Honor issued the ruling on the motion in limine, and that was that would the witness, I was willing to stipulate to all of this information being presented to the jury without having a witness. Obviously, Mr. Levine can try the case the way he wants to, and he said he wanted to call law enforcement officer from Oklahoma. And then I said something to the effect of, are they going to be able to testify that Collin was not charged? And we all said, well, they've got to know that he wasn't charged. And now him saying, so far as I know, I mean,
I thought he said, as of May, whatever it was.
he said, so
23.
far as I know, but I don't know the timing. He was very, he seemed a little wishy-washy on it,
About what issue?
about whether Collin was charged.
I mean, I can't speak for the officer, but the officer knows he wasn't charged. If Ms. Thornhill is concerned about him having a qualified answer to the best of my, if he says to the best of my knowledge or whatnot, I'm fine if it's acceptable for him to understand through the court that he is allowed and permitted to just give a honest, short answer, which is, no, the defendant wasn't charged.
Well, I'm not going to tell the witness what the truth is. So if the witness doesn't know for sure, that's his answer. I mean, I don't remember him specifically, what he specifically said about that particular question. I was listening more for the September 8th. And that's where I thought I heard the, to my knowledge or, best of my belief. But
Well, I just want to make sure, like, in fairness to the defense, I agree with the proposition that the evidence is and should show for the benefit of the jury, obviously honesty and clarity that the defendant was not charged pertaining to the killing in Oklahoma.
so, Ms. Thornhill, let me ask you this question. If the witness testifies and afterwards I agree with you that he was wishy-washy, if he indeed is wishy-washy on that, is there a problem, assuming the state agrees, to simply instructing the jury, members of the jury, the decision in Oklahoma not to charge Mr. Griffith was made on whatever date it was by the district attorney, something to that effect.
That is great. I've been trying
Mr.
to
Levine?
have that be the result the whole
I mean,
time.
if the witness gives forthright testimony that he was not, that the district attorney did not, made the decision not to charge him, then there's no need for that instruction. So, Mr. Levine, what's your
I'm
position?
fine with that.
All right. And then I,
No, I'm not going to say anything about the bond. No talk about bond.
all right.
I was just trying to.
And sitting here thinking about it, do you both agree that this issue of whether it's open or closed at the time of this incident, that you really don't need to go into that. I mean, isn't it sort of apparent to even just a lay person that cases can be reopened? Homicides can be reopened. So even, and it does appear to be the case that at the time of this incident, that case was closed, done, over, in the filing cabinet, and that the only reason it might be open now is because of this incident, but that a jury would understand that the threat of exposure still carries the same weight in the mind of the person who's threatened. Yeah, they said it was self-defense back then, or said they couldn't disprove self-defense back then. This is going to cause a problem, and they're going to reopen it, and especially if there's Ring doorbell evidence of me saying it was a murder and not self-defense. Isn't that, do you agree that the average juror would understand that to be the case, Mr. Levine?
If I followed you correctly, I think that would be reasonable.
So without having to have testimony about whether it was open or closed at the time of at the specific time of this incident.
Yes, and I think that's reasonable. I think it's fair to both sides because neither side is able to advance that it wouldn't be filed or is going to be filed or is not going to be filed. It's really irrelevant the way Your Honor explained it and go in any further detail.
Ms. Thornhill?
Yes, Judge, I just wanted to make the record clear. I am not reading any previous
I know
objections.
you're not.
Okay. I think simple, short. He was a first responder. There was a death of a person, 2 gunshot wounds, one to the head, one to the chest. Collin was arrested. He was never charged, period.
And it was not disputed that the defendant shot and killed the person.
That's fine.
All right. I think that was my rule.
Yeah, exactly, but I anticipated and believed, I think with good reason, that it might go beyond that.
All right. Could we have
like 30 seconds? I need to confer with the defense about one quick thing.
Could we have that the witness again? Sir, you're about to be called to the stand by the state, and both parties have agreed that I should instruct you on the limits of your testimony. You're going to be asked some questions, and you may testify regarding the following facts: that you were a first responder to the killing in Oklahoma. You're not to say anything that it was a house or that the deceased person was his father or related to him in some fashion. You are permitted to testify that the deceased person was shot in the chest and shot in the head, once in the chest, once in the head. That it's not in dispute that it was Mr. Griffith over there who inflicted those injuries, and that he was never charged in that incident. Have I left anything out, counsel?
No, Your Honor.
Ms. Thornhill?
Yes, sir.
I will ask the officer if he could identify the defendant.
That's fine.
All right. So do you have any questions about the limits of your testimony?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Thank you. If you just step outside. We're ready. Be seated. Mr. Levine, next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Officer Christopher Hyde.
Please tell me, swear or affirm that the testimony given in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
So I'm going around the back, watch your step.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Officer Hyde, may you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your name for the record?
My name is Christopher Hyde, spelled CHRISTOPHERHYDE.
And where are you employed?
I'm employed as a police officer with the Iowa Tribe Police Department.
And what state is that in?
That is in Oklahoma.
And how long have you been employed in law enforcement?
Approximately 8 years now.
Now, I want to direct your attention specifically to February 14th of 2023. Were you working for the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office as a deputy on that date?
I was.
And did you respond to a homicide scene within your jurisdiction?
Yes,
Were you one of the first responders?
I was.
Were you able to determine through your investigation that the deceased individual had been shot 2 times?
That is correct.
Were you able to determine that 1 gunshot wound was to the chest and 1 gunshot wound was to the head?
Yes,
Through your investigation, were you able to determine that the defendant here in court is the individual who shot the deceased?
yes.
Now, the person that you saw that day, do you see them in court today?
I do.
If you recognize them by something they're wearing, could you state that for the record and perhaps point to the individual?
The defendant is seated at the defense table in a gray suit jacket.
Your Honor, the record will reflect Officer Hyde has identified the defendant. And is it a fair statement that the defendant was not charged for that killing in Oklahoma by the prosecutor's office?
That is correct.
And was the defendant arrested for that?
He was.
All right, Officer Hyde, I have no further questions.
Ms. Ross,
No cross.
is the witness released?
He is, Your Honor.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's about 10 after noon. We will take our hour lunch at this time. Remember, don't talk about the case with anyone. If anyone approaches you and tries to talk to you about the case, tell them you're on the jury. Tell them to stop. If they don't, leave and let me know as soon as you can by writing it down and giving it to the bailiff. Please enjoy your lunch and return at 10 after 1.
All rise, please. May I be seated?
Do we need to take care of this issue regarding your client's presence during publication of the 911?
We have discussed it again, and his desire is once again to be outside of the courtroom
All
when
right.
it's published, play for the jury. Putting him back in a holding cell is acceptable.
Mr. Levine, is that going to be directly after lunch?
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Griffith, you're still under oath. We had previously been talking about your decision